At 5 in the morning, while Boston was still sleeping, lights were already on in the kitchen of Ristorante Rosemary. The red brick building facing the street quietly held 45 years of history. Elizabeth opened its heavy door, greeting another unchanged morning. "Good morning, Tom." Elizabeth Rosemary greeted head chef Tom Riley while slipping into her crisp white chef's coat as usual. Tom, already kneading pasta dough, gave a slight wave with his flour-covered hands in response. His handmade pasta was one of the restaurant's signature dishes. The scent of yeast wafting through the kitchen. Elizabeth took a deep breath. This aroma connected to the oldest parts of her memories, days spent playing in her parents' restaurant kitchen as a child, looking up at her father making handmade pasta from a tiny chair, memories of her mother's warm voice chatting with regular customers echoing softly from the dining room. Her eyes caught an old photograph hanging on the white-tiled wall. A family photo from when they first opened. Her young father George and mother Martha embracing herself and her sister Caitlin as children. Her father's proud smile in the photo warmed Elizabeth's heart. Next to it was a photo from her culinary school graduation, and another from when she took over the family business after completing her training in New York. Each one told a story of her deep attachment to this place. "Liz, could you help me prep the truffle sauce?" Tom's voice brought her back to reality, and Elizabeth took her place at the cutting board with practiced movements. Her hands gripped the knife with pride, both as a chef and as an owner. New copper pots lined the counter, and rich aromas rose from the mirepoix stock prepared the night before. In the dining room, deep red booths quietly awaited the morning, with meticulously polished wine glasses arranged neatly on white tablecloths. In the pre-opening stillness, the two worked in perfect sync in the kitchen. Outside, the sky was gradually brightening. Morning sunlight streamed through the vintage wine bottle display, creating ethereal patterns on the floor. "Good morning, sis." Elizabeth turned at the sudden voice to find Caitlin standing there. Her sister, who had quit her investment banking job 6 months ago to return to the restaurant, was dressed in her usual sharp suit. The sound of her heels clicking as she entered the kitchen carrying a luxury brand bag seemed somewhat out of place in the kitchen atmosphere. "You're unusually early. I have some new menu proposals. I'll talk about them at tonight's dinner meeting. And I've also thought about our social media marketing strategy." Caitlin's blue eyes sparkled with something scheming. Since her return, various proposals had been emerging one after another, from new menus to interior changes. Admittedly, many of her suggestions made sense. Elizabeth pondered while chopping onions. Tradition and innovation. That delicate balance was always a challenge that occupied her mind. The recipes inherited from her father. The relationships with regular customers that her mother had cherished. Her mission, she believed, was to find a way to preserve these while adapting to changing times. "Oh, by the way," Caitlin added as if suddenly remembering, "Mom and Dad approved the Chicago competition." Elizabeth's hands paused for a moment. The National Italian Cuisine Competition. A stage she had longed for years to compete on. If she participated, it would require a 2-week trip. But the restaurant. "I'll take care of it. You can't miss this opportunity, right? Besides, Mom and Dad trust my judgment." Elizabeth slowly nodded at her sister's words. Indeed, this was an opportunity she couldn't pass up. Yet something nagged at the back of her mind. Was it her instinct as a chef? Or her intuition as an older sister? The Chicago sky carried May's refreshing breeze. Walking briskly through the airport terminal, Elizabeth touched the gold medal gleaming on her chest. Victory at the National Italian Cuisine Competition. It still felt like a dream. Everyone will be so happy. In the taxi, Elizabeth smiled, imagining her family's reaction. Her father especially would be proud. The restaurant had never won an award since its opening. As the familiar sights of Boston began to appear, Elizabeth's heart raced with anticipation. However, when she stepped out of the car in front of the restaurant, she sensed something was wrong. The time when the restaurant should have been bustling with opening preparations. Yet the interior was strangely quiet. The potted plants at the entrance looked neglected, with withering leaves swaying in the wind. "I'm back." Entering the floor, unfamiliar staff members cast cold glances her way. There were no warm greetings. The family photos that had hung on the walls had been replaced with modern artwork. Tom was nowhere to be seen. Instead, an unknown young chef was giving instructions in the kitchen. The menu board showed no traditional Italian dishes, only modern fusion cuisine. What's going on? Confused, Elizabeth headed to her office. But just as she reached for the door, she heard voices from inside. Caitlin's voice and that of an unknown man. "Mr. Sterling, the final contract review is complete." "Perfect, Caitlin. I'm impressed with your abilities." Opening the door hesitantly, Elizabeth found Caitlin sitting at the desk. Her father's old leather chair had been replaced with a stylish office chair. Next to her sister stood a sophisticated middle-aged man. "Oh, welcome back, sis." Caitlin smiled gracefully. Her expression held an unfamiliar coldness. "Caitlin? Why are you in my office? And who is this?" "Anthony Sterling, Vice President of Sterling Development," Caitlin introduced him, then settled back in her chair. "Oh, and this is my office now." "What do you mean?" "Mom and Dad made me CEO. We don't need you anymore." The words were thrown out in an almost playful tone, as if she was enjoying hurting her sister. Elizabeth's hands trembled. The gold medal felt cold against her chest. This must be some mistake. "I'll check with our parents." Taking out her smartphone, she dialed her mother's number. After 2 rings, her mother's voice came through. "Mom, what's going on?"
Ah.
Elizabeth, her mother's voice lacked its usual warmth. "You heard from Caitlin, didn't you?" "I did, but why?" "Your sister is more capable than you. You're fired. Get out right now." Elizabeth silently ended the call. Her fingers were shaking. In the office, she could hear Caitlin's giggles. Vice President Sterling watched the scene with interest. "I've packed up your things. The contents of your desk are in a box in the backyard." Elizabeth slowly looked around. New decorations adorned the walls, and unfamiliar files lined the shelves. Her father's recipe notebook and her mother's handwritten customer list were nowhere to be seen. "Don't worry about the customer relationships," Caitlin added. "We have a new vision. We don't need to cling to old regulars." Vice President Sterling wore a smirk. Elizabeth sensed something ominous in his expression, but she had no emotional capacity to pursue it now. Passing through the kitchen on her way to the backyard, she saw the new chef barking orders while unfamiliar staff members rushed about. No one would look her way. Picking up the cardboard box, Elizabeth left the restaurant with a heavy heart. The spring sunlight seemed to mock her pain with its brightness. Across the street stood Maria Conti. A regular customer since the opening, she watched with a worried expression. Elizabeth gave a small bow and hurried away. Tears rolled down her cheeks, but Elizabeth didn't stop walking. She etched this frustration and humiliation deeply into her heart. Elizabeth sat alone on her bed, staring at her smartphone screen. Instagram was filled with new photos of Ristorante Rosemary. Modern lighting illuminating innovative presentations. No trace remained of the traditional Italian cuisine. The posts were captioned, "A fresh wind in Boston's tradition," and had garnered many likes. "Madam, it's your mother calling again." Lucy, the housekeeper, appeared with the landline receiver. Elizabeth shook her head slightly. This made 15 calls this week alone. She was letting all calls from her parents go to voicemail. Aren't they worried? Yes, I'm sure they are. But I'm not ready to talk yet. Elizabeth stood up and headed to the kitchen. This small kitchen was all she had now for her cooking. Still, her hands wouldn't rest. She began chopping vegetables, gripping the knife firmly. Minced onions. Diced celery. Julienne carrots. She tried to calm her mind by returning to the basics. Liz. Open up. We need to talk. Suddenly, there was a banging on the door. It was Tom Riley's voice. Elizabeth hesitated for a moment but eventually went to the door. "Finally found you," he was out of breath. "I quit the restaurant. That new chef doesn't even understand the basics of cooking. And the way he treats the staff." As Elizabeth listened to Tom's story, she brewed tea. Through the steam, his expression was filled with bitterness. Regular customers are leaving one after another. Even Maria Conti said she's going to another restaurant for the first time in 40 years. "I see." Elizabeth's voice trembled slightly. "But you know," Tom leaned forward, "something strange is happening. Sterling Development's cars are parked in front of the restaurant almost every day. And Tony from the bakery next door said they've been getting high-priced buyout offers for the whole block." Elizabeth's hands stopped. Something was beginning to connect in her mind. Just then, her smartphone vibrated. A message from an unknown number. The sender was listed as A.M. Conti. "Elizabeth, I need to see you. I have important information. Could you come to my house tonight?" At dusk, Elizabeth stood in front of an old mansion in Beacon Hill. Maria Conti welcomed her with her usual elegant manner. "Let me make some tea. And there's something I want to show you." Maria pulled out a worn file. "These are documents from a redevelopment plan 40 years ago. Back then, a major developer was targeting our area too. But the plan fell through thanks to the Historical Building Protection Ordinance." Elizabeth looked through the documents. The similarities to the current situation were striking. Sterling Development has plans to turn this entire area into luxury condominiums. My contact on the City Development Board told me. Maria revealed even more shocking information. Your sister is acting as their agent. She must have been promised a huge reward in exchange for selling the restaurant. The puzzle pieces were falling into place in Elizabeth's mind. The sudden CEO change. The dramatic interior changes. Cutting ties with regular customers. It was all part of the plan. That night, back in her apartment, Elizabeth sat at her computer. She researched late into the night about the area's history, building protection ordinances, and past redevelopment plans. A few days later, Elizabeth attended a meeting of local business owners. Tony from the bakery, Sarah from the produce store, Marcus from the used bookstore. Everyone shared the same concerns. Our stores aren't just businesses, Elizabeth stood up and began speaking. They're the heart of this community. Nods of agreement came from around the room. The historical building protection ordinance is still active. We must have a way to fight. There was new determination in Elizabeth's voice. However, that determination would be tested sooner than expected. The next morning, she received an urgent call from Tom. Liz, it's terrible. Caitlin has started demolishing the old wine cellar. That cellar is connected to the building's foundation. This is... Through the phone, she heard something collapse, followed by screams. Elizabeth's trembling hands dialed the city building inspection department's number. 3 days after the wine cellar collapse, Ristorante Rosemary was ordered to cease operations. An inspection revealed unauthorized renovation work and serious structural damage to the building. Elizabeth watched the restaurant from a cafe across the street. Yellow tape sealed off the entrance, and an no entry sign swayed in the wind. The building's history had been so easily put at risk. Here's your cappuccino, miss. As the waiter brought her cappuccino, Elizabeth suddenly noticed something. On the 3rd floor of the building across the street, she saw a familiar figure moving. It was Anthony Sterling. And next to him, Caitlin. Her sister, dressed in an expensive suit, was deep in conversation with Sterling. Something that looked like documents was passed between them. Elizabeth took a sip of her now lukewarm cappuccino and stood up. Liz, come quick. Tom rushed in breathlessly. Something's happening behind the building. They hurried to the alley. Workers were carrying out furniture and fixtures through the back door, including antique pieces that had been treasured since the opening. They're preparing for the sale, Elizabeth bit her lip. But the contract shouldn't be final yet. Just then, one of the workers dropped a large wooden box. An old leather-bound notebook fell out. Elizabeth's eyes widened. Father's recipe notebook. She instinctively started forward, but Tom grabbed her arm to stop her. Wait. We shouldn't move now. Come with me. Tom led her to an old warehouse a little way from the street. Several familiar faces were already gathered there. Tony from the bakery, Maria Conti, and Barbara Morrison, reporter. It's been a while, Elizabeth. The star reporter from the Boston Daily smiled kindly. I've heard about your situation from Maria. And look at this. Barbara opened her laptop. The screen displayed internal documents from Sterling Development. This redevelopment plan was actually prepared 3 years ago. They plan to turn the whole area into luxury condominiums. Total cost, $200 million. And your store's block is at the center of it. Elizabeth gasped. Scrolling through the screen revealed even more shocking information. Sterling planned to work on key persons to suppress local opposition. And they set their sights on your sister, Caitlin. Tony added new information. Yesterday, there was an interesting development at the City Development Board. Sterling Development submitted an emergency building permit application. The reason: need for emergency demolition due to structural dangers. No way. Elizabeth's voice trembled. The wine cellar collapse. Yes, it was planned, Maria said quietly. They're trying to force through an emergency demolition using that collapse as an excuse. Just then, they heard a car outside the warehouse. Carefully peeking out, they saw a luxury car stopping in front of the store. Her parents stepped out from the back seat. George and Martha Rosemary stood in front of the store, looking different from usual. Her father especially wore an exhausted expression. Sterling and Caitlin came out to greet them. Elizabeth started to rush out, but Barbara stopped her. Wait. Let's watch a little longer. The group went inside. After a while, Tom's phone vibrated. I know what's happening inside. My junior colleague is still working there. Tom read the received message. Witnessed contract signing. Present were the Rosemarys, Sterling, Caitlin, and 2 lawyers. Sale price $20 million. Parents' payment $5 million. Caitlin's reward $2 million. Elizabeth's hands shook. The family history was about to be sold off for just $20 million. But it's not over yet, Barbara stood up. Actually, there's one more crucial piece of information. She pulled out old architectural drawings. Your restaurant was designed by architect Alfred Lawrence in the 1920s. Last week, the city of Boston secretly decided to designate all his buildings as historical landmarks. Your store will be protected. This designation is scheduled to be announced next Monday. Sterling and the others are trying to create a fait accompli before then. Elizabeth took a deep breath. A plan was forming in her mind. Inside the warehouse, they continued developing their counterattack strategy. Outside, the evening sky was turning red. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise from inside the store. Then someone shouting, "Papa!" Elizabeth cried out instinctively. The warehouse door opened. There stood her father, his face pale. "Elizabeth, help me." In George Rosemary's hand was a yellowed photograph. It captured the moment he proudly stood in front of the store on opening day, when he was still young. Boston's autumn was turning maple leaves golden. On a side street off Hanover Street, warm lights glowed from a small restaurant. The name was Casa Elizabeth. Though small with only 40 seats, it had become so popular that weekend reservations were booked 3 months in advance. Elizabeth, the guests at table 7 would like to meet the chef. Jenny, the hostess, peeked into the kitchen. Elizabeth quickly finished plating the pasta and adjusted the collar of her white chef's coat. Yes, right away. Stepping into the dining room, she met a familiar face. It was Maria Conti. Next to her sat a group of longtime regular customers who had been coming since opening day. Tonight's veal parmigiana tastes exactly like your father's recipe, Maria's eyes softened. but I noticed some new touches in the pasta sauce. Thank you, Elizabeth smiled. I want to preserve tradition while evolving bit by bit. Outside the window, the old Ristorante Rosemary building cast shadows in the twilight. Having received historical landmark status, the building would be preserved. However, the interior remained empty. Much had changed since that day. Barbara Morrison's front-page article in the Boston Daily caused quite a stir. The truth behind the plot to destroy a historic restaurant, developers' conspiracy, and family betrayal. The article detailed Sterling Development's illegal manipulation and the planned destruction of the building. They say her father George trembled as he read that article. What was I trying to protect? His confession revealed even more shocking facts. Sterling had begun their manipulation 3 years ago, anticipating the restaurant's financial difficulties. Even approaching Caitlin had been part of their plan. Her parents now live in a small house in the suburbs. Though they struggle with debt repayment, Elizabeth visits every Sunday, bringing homemade meals. Daughter, I'm truly sorry. No, Dad. We still have plenty of time to look forward. Martha, her mother, isn't as sociable as she used to be. However, she occasionally visits Casa Elizabeth and reminisces about old times. Back then, you could barely hold a knife properly. Yes, but you never gave up on teaching me, Mom. Tom Riley continues to work as Elizabeth's right-hand man. The new restaurant also focuses on training young chefs. Liz, look. Jimmy's risotto has really improved. Yes. I'm so happy to see his growth. 1 year since opening. Casa Elizabeth was beginning to build its own tradition. In one corner of the restaurant, there's a small photo section. The original Ristorante Rosemary on opening day. Her smiling parents. Childhood photos of the sisters. And a group photo with all the new restaurant's staff. Past and present blend together gently. The last contact from Caitlin was a postcard from Paris. Sister, I was wrong. But I believe you can create a new tradition. Will you forgive me someday? Elizabeth had placed that card in a corner of the photo section. After the redevelopment plan fell through, Sterling Development took a major hit. Anthony Sterling was forced to resign, and the company's reputation was destroyed. However, this incident had an unexpected benefit. The neighborhood's unity grew stronger than ever before. Tony from the bakery bakes special ciabatta for Elizabeth's restaurant. Sarah from the produce store has contracted with local organic farmers to supply the finest vegetables. Marcus from the used bookstore carefully selects each vintage Italian cookbook that lines the restaurant's shelves. The bonds of this community are our true treasure. The regular customers quietly nodded at Maria Conti's words. Elizabeth surveyed the full restaurant. Families enjoyed their meals at the tables, while regular customers relaxed at the counter. Pleasant cooking sounds and aromas wafted from the kitchen. Thank you for coming tonight. After closing, while seeing off the last customers, Elizabeth looked up at the night sky. The stars twinkled gently. The next morning. As usual at 5 a.m., Elizabeth unlocked the restaurant door. While waiting for fresh ingredients to arrive, she began her preparations. She felt a sure weight in her hands as she held her knife. It was the unwavering confidence of someone building a new tradition. Outside, the morning sun began to illuminate the old townscape, heralding the start of a new day.